Hey Artnerds! Today we are doing a Copic marker tutorial that focuses specifically on techniques for coloring eyes with alcohol markers. And these are eyes colored in kind of an anime style. Now I have a few other videos on this channel where we color eyes, so I also recommend that you guys check those out, but this is really going to focus on getting smooth blends and transitions with the eye. Now, unfortunately, I don't know which Copic markers I used for this tutorial, so you're going to have to swatch and select your own using your best judgment. So we are starting out by drawing a head using constructive human anatomy. So that means I start with a sphere. I draw a crosshair on the sphere to help me find the midpoint. Then I extend the sphere down into the lower part of the jaw. I draw a middle eye that's going to help me place the actual eyes, and then I draw an eye on either side of the middle eye. And I do this regardless of the art style that I'm using. If I'm doing something very realistic, I will use this sort of placement. If I'm doing something very cartoony, I'll use this sort of placement. Next, I draw two circles around the eyes. These are going to help me place the eyebrows, and I begin cleaning up the head and filling in the other features. Now I wanted something that was really cute and cartoony, so I'm doing a great big jelly bean mouth, and I'm going to do cute little jug handle ears. Now that I have everything roughly sketched in, I can start refining some of my details. Now, one of the things that I notice a lot of younger artists doing is they jump right into the favorite details. The whole, well, I can draw one eye, why can't I draw the other eye conundrum? By drawing everything in kind of a sketchy format and figuring out my placement, this allows me to successfully draw matching eyes or matching eyebrows, or to place the rest of the face like the nose and the mouth. So I really recommend, if you're looking to draw something that's a little bit more finished out, or you would like your art to be consistently better. I know how it is when you can draw a really good picture and then you're never able to replicate it again. If you'd like to improve your art game consistently, this method is a great way to do it. And I am sketching everything in with Pilot Color Eno lead in pink. The reason I like this lead is it is alcohol and water soluble. As you guys will see later on in the tutorial, it sort of dissolves into the alcohol marker. So you do need to erase, or I find it beneficial to erase some of the more like the establishing lines, like the crosshair, things like that. But you can leave a lot of these lines and they're going to later blend in. So I'm doing a different style of anime eyes today. We're doing what I think of as little donut eyes, where there's actually a white reflection instead of a black pupil. And we're giving her cute little eyebrows. Okay, so now that we have the sketch finished, I'm swatching the colors that I want. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you which Copic colors I used for this, but I really want you to experiment, find your own favorite color combinations, and if you're looking for more inspiration, I do have Copic marker tutorials where I walk you through selecting skin tones, selecting hair colors, and selecting triads that always work. So I would recommend you check out those videos as well. And this tutorial will work with any alcohol markers that have a nice flexible brush tip. So it should work with Shinhan, it should work with Artist Loft, it should work with Prismacolor, it should work with Copic Chow. I'm just using Copic Sketch in my tutorial. So for the majority of what I'm coloring, I'm using my overblend technique, and that allows me to use fewer markers. So this is a technique that's really good if you have a really small marker collection. And I have a tutorial where I kind of talk about the overblending technique in more depth, and I'll make sure to link other videos where I demonstrate how to color hair, how to color eyes, that sort of thing. The cool thing about the overblending technique is I basically just need 2 colors, maybe 3 colors. We need our mid-tone skin tone, we need a blender marker, we need our shadow color, and then we need our blush color. Now we can use the same skin tone. I guess I used E00 for the first layer. If we allow it to dry, we can get a second layer out of it, and that way we're building up the skin tone without using additional colors. We're just using more of the same color. Next, I use E11 to apply my shadow color. Where I want it to be a softer transition, I'm going to blend that back with E00. And I'm using E93 to apply blush to her cheeks and to her lips. And this is a technique that was inspired by the artist who does the webcomic Harpy G, the way she handles blush and cheeks. So Brianne Druhard is a big inspiration for me when it comes to marker art. And now that the exposure isn't horribly messed up, you can see that the colors actually work better together than they first appeared. So next we're going to work on her hair, and we're using violets to color in her hair, and it's a pretty simple procedure. I'm just using 3 colors, a highlight, a mid-tone, and then my darkest tone, and I'm using the colorless blender to blend it back out. And I really like using the brush for this because I can work the brush to leave really distinct highlights. And I do have a video coming up, or I have a video already scheduled. Time gets all wibbly wobbly. I have a video about coloring hair with Copic markers, as well as several other videos where I walk you through coloring hair. In this instance, since she has curly hair, I wanted to make sure I left lots of room for highlights. And you basically want to think about where the light is hitting the hair. So let's say the light is coming from the sun, so it's hitting the top of her hair. So it would hit not quite where the part is, since the part would be indented, but like right below that. It would hit the topmost part of the curl in her bangs, and for any curls in her hair, it would hit kind of the topmost part of those curls. Blending it out with a lighter marker that's running a bit dry, as well as with the colorless blender. I wait for the ink to evaporate, and then I can add another layer with my base color. And this allows me to better establish my shadows. You can see we're really getting quite a difference between the first two layers. I have a couple of reds that I'm coloring the interior of her mouth. In retrospect, it would have been cuter if I'd gone with like a hot pink color and then we'd left this very pastel. The reds do throw off that sort of pastel color scheme a little bit. So I apply my lighter red, and then while that's still wet, I apply my darker red and blend that back out with the lighter red. So I find the fluorescent violet, which I'm using here, actually works really nicely as like a medium violet, kind of a bluer violet. So I'm using that to add shadows to our already established hair color. You don't actually have to work the shadows too much if you don't want to. Kind of depends on how much light and how much contrast you're trying to bring into the piece. If you add too many shadows, it's going to darken the hair color significantly. If you add too few, it may be difficult to tell where the light source is coming from. So we're going to color in the yosh with 3 different teals and a colorless blender, and I'm walking you guys through this because the techniques I use to color in this yosh are how I also approach coloring in eyes. So we start with our lightest actual color, then we work in our next darkest color, then we're going to color in with our darkest color, and then we're going to blend everything back out with the next lightest color. So I'm applying the darkest color now. I'm going to blend that out with our mid-tone to soften that transition, and then I'm going to blend out our mid-tone with our lightest tone to soften that transition, and then I'm going to blend that out with the colorless blender. And I have a video here on this channel that walks you through blending alcohol markers, and we use very, very cheap alcohol markers for that video to make it more accessible and more approachable. So if you're working with bullet tip alcohol markers and you're looking for some tips and tricks, that video could be a great place to start. And you can see I repeated it for all 4 letters, and it gives you a very simple monochrome ombre effect. You could do this with, say, yellow to green to blue to violet and then to pink, and that would give you kind of a pastel rainbow effect. And if you guys are interested in seeing how that would work, let me know in the comments below, and I'm happy to demonstrate it for you guys. Now I'm just cleaning it up a little bit with a darker teal, adding that to the bottom to make it even darker, and kind of outlining some of the forms to give it a little bit of depth and shadow. And now that her hair has had a chance to dry, I'm just going back in with fluorescent violet and adding some more darker shadows and pulling a few tighter details. So finally we begin what you guys are all waiting for, coloring her eyes. So we apply the very, very light green pretty much around her entire eye. I actually leave a little bit of rim lighting at the bottom to imply that light is hitting her eyes at the bottom of her eye. That was a really popular way of rendering eyes in older manga and in older animes, to leave that lighter highlight at the bottom of the eyes. You can see I do it in both eyes. And when I'm working on a really thirsty paper like this Blick Studio sketchbook paper, I really like saturating the paper and really mashing the brush in. And the reason I do that is because I really wanted to put down a lot of ink. So I'm using RV000 as a sort of a light accent or a contrast accent. So what this is going to do is it's going to add a little bit of pink to her eyes, which is a contrast color with the teal. And it's also going to lighten that area a little bit. And I use this technique a lot when I was doing the Copic marker Monster Girl pieces I did last year. So I'm going back over the eye with the very, very light teal again, adding another layer. What's cool about alcohol markers, particularly Copic markers, is you can get about 3 layers of color. So you can see here in the photo, we were really able to get a lot of additional color. And I basically added that teal to the top half of her eye, so where we had initially applied the eyeshadow. Now I'm going in with a darker teal color. It's not significantly darker, but it's a little bit darker. I guess it would be the mid-tone color that we used in the Yosh. And I've been working wet into wet so we can get really nice smooth blends. That's one of the reasons I like working on these thirstier papers. Now I'm going in with our darkest teal from the Yosh, and I'm using that pretty much just at the tops of her eyes. And remember earlier I referred to this style of doing eyes as donut eyes? We're going to leave her pupils white, so the reflection of the eyes is actually in the pupils. And now I'm blending out that darker teal with the mid-tone teal. And I may end up blending that mid-tone teal out with the lighter teal. It kind of depends on how it looks. So I allowed that to dry, and now I'm going back in with a darker teal, and I'm outlining the exterior of her eye as well as her eye underneath the eyelid, and that's to imply shadow. Some people have darker like a ring around their irises. I also added 2 little dots of the darker color sort of as like a counter reflection and to help balance all the shininess that's going on in her eyes. You guys can feel free to add whatever colors and whatever details you want to do. Now I'm adding that darkest color to the tops of the eyes in an even thicker line. And I had allowed the previous layer to dry before I applied that. That way we get a sharper transition rather than a really soft diffused blend. Now I'm going in with B01 and I'm adding more shadow to the tops of her eyes because it wasn't quite as dark as I'd wanted. Of course, after I applied it, I realized it was actually darker than what I wanted, so I blended it out a little bit using either the colorless blender or the original very, very light blue that I had applied. So I know right now it looks a little bit scary and a little bit messy, but this is just the ugly stage and we just need to see this through. So this is where practicing and experimenting really come into play because it's going to give you a toolbox of solutions that you can apply to fix the problem. So once it's dried, it's actually not so bad, and I'm applying a very light blue around her head just to kind of place her in space. This is to give the implication of a little bit of shadow. And I'm doing the same thing with the letters. Next, I added a little bit of the darker blue, the same darker blue that we used in her eyes. By adding this into the shadows, we're introducing it into the color palette, normalizing it in the color palette so that the only place it appears isn't in her eye. So it's not going to stand out as much. And then we're blending it back with the colorless blender. So to ink this, I'm using 2 of the Tombow Furenosuke colored pens. We're using the purple one and we're using the pink. I really love these brush pens. I like how they handle. They have little bitty solid brushes at the top, and they are supposedly the firm brushes, although I haven't seen any other hardness being sold in American stores, so I don't know if Tombow has released other hardnesses or other sizes of these colored brush pins yet. I've reviewed a lot of brush pins over the years, so I'm very picky about which ones I like and which ones I recommend. These are a lot of fun because as of my testing, I haven't done a full field test with these yet. They seem to be alcohol marker safe, which is unusual because usually with these sort of colored inks, they're going to be alcohol marker reactive because they're water-based. These are pigment-based, so they're kind of like the Sakura Microns or the Copic multiliners, and they're available in several different colors, including purple and pink, which you guys are seeing here. So I am going to ink her hair, her eyebrows, and her eyelids in purple, and I'm going to ink the majority of her face in pink. And I'm inking her face in pink because it brings out the youthful freshness of her skin tone. It makes her look young, and it's a very playful color combination, so it adds a lot of color and liveliness. If we'd inked this with all purple, it might have dragged it down a little bit. We're using the purple on her eyelashes because her hair is purple, so it only makes sense that her eyelashes would be a similar color to her hair. And there's a lot of different ways that you can draw eyelashes, draw eyelids, render and ink eyelashes and eyelids. I use a very solid sort of style where my eyelashes are basically a single unit, and I usually will use about 3 long strokes to achieve that sort of solid upper lid, and then 1 very fine stroke at the bottom to achieve the lower lid, and I curve it slightly just to kind of make it a little bit more delicate and remove some of the cartooniness from it. I also have a stroke from the top of the eyelid going to the corner of her eye, and then another shorter stroke at the back of her eye, and it's sort of like the completion of the eyelash. And I apologize because my camera angle actually occluded you being able to see me ink that. I do have other inking videos where I walk you through inking faces and inking panels, so if you're interested, you should check those out. So now I'm going to add some white highlights, and I have a large white Pitt pen. So Pitt pens use India ink. It's not going to react with the alcohol marker. I use a large white Pitt pen to add large white highlights to her eyes, and that really adds a lot of playfulness and a lot of bounciness to it. Usually adding the highlights when we're drawing anime style eyes, that's when the eyes really start to come together. So after I added the white Pitt pen, I let that dry, and now I'm inking the interior of the eye with the pink Tombow Furenosuke. And I apologize again that my hand is occluding the view. I know it would be helpful for you guys to see that. So I actually inked the top half of her eyes using the purple. We're just trying to get some depth, some darkness, and some shade going on here. So I thought going from purple to pink would be a really good way to help capture that transition. And if you have it, a green, a teal, or a blue would also work for her eyes, but I thought keeping the color palette limited, and that's why I should have colored the inside of her mouth pink, but I thought keeping the color palette limited would make this cuter. And really, you can ink with whatever you're comfortable with inking or with using. So do not take what I use and what I recommend as the end-all be-all. If there's something that you prefer, that you're more comfortable and more confident with, please continue to use that. So now I'm adding just a little line across the top using the purple. That's to imply more shadow in the eye. And that was an optional choice. You don't have to include that if you don't like it. It's all about tweaking. When you draw in any art style, it's all about tweaking it until it looks the way you want it to look. So don't worry about whether or not things look the right way. Well, I mean, understanding anatomy goes a long way. But I mean, don't worry too much about whether or not it looks like, oh, this looks like real anime. Worry more about, do I like this? Does this look like something I enjoy? So now I'm adding some white highlights with the large white Pitt pen to the yosh and to her hair. And I'm going to use the same inking technique to ink yosh as I did for her eyes. So the bottom half is going to be purple and the top half is going to be pink. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope today's focus on drawing and coloring and inking anime style / anime inspired eyes was helpful, useful, and informative for you guys. If you like my art, if you like what I do, you guys ought to check out my webcomic 7-inch Kara at 7inchkara.com and 7inchkara.tumblr.com. And if you like what I do, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click that bell notification so you never miss an update. I teach Copic marker classes here in Nashville, so if you'd like to sign up for my class mailing list, it'll let you know what I'm teaching, and when I'll be in your area. You guys can find a link to that down in the description below. Thank you guys again so much for joining me today. I had a blast. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have any questions, and make sure you check the description. Bye guys!